I signed up for the pottery class because I wanted to make something. That sounds simple. It wasn't. I had spent 11 years in a career that produced nothing you could hold. I worked in data analysis, which meant I spent my days finding patterns in numbers and translating them into reports that influenced decisions that affected outcomes that were several steps removed from anything resembling a physical object. I was good at it. I found genuine satisfaction in the work. But I had arrived at 34 with the quiet, persistent feeling that my hands had never made anything, and that this was a lack I couldn't keep ignoring. So I signed up for a 6-week wheel throwing class at a ceramic studio 3 blocks from my apartment on Tuesday evenings from 7 to 9, and showed up on the first night with clean hands and absolutely no idea what I was doing. There were 7 of us. The instructor's name was Claire. She was perhaps 5 years older than me, with clay already on her forearms when we arrived, which I liked immediately. The evidence of someone who had been working before we got there, who did not perform the beginning of things. She had the kind of face that was interesting rather than conventionally pretty, all strong angles and directness, and she moved through the studio with the easy authority of someone completely at home in a space. She looked at us assembled around our wheels with an expression that was warm and also, faintly, amused. "Everyone is going to fail tonight," she said. "That's not a warning. That's the curriculum." She was right. The clay did not do what I wanted it to do. It did not do what anyone wanted it to do. It wobbled and collapsed and flew off center, and in one memorable instance, launched itself entirely off the wheel of the man to my left, who swore with great feeling, and Claire laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, and said, "That's actually impressive. Most people just collapse, they don't launch." I collapsed, repeatedly. I could not find the center. Centering the clay is the foundational skill of wheel throwing, and it requires a particular combination of pressure and counterforce and body position that my hands could not locate through instruction alone. Claire came around to each student, crouching beside the wheel, watching, offering adjustments. When she got to me, she watched for a moment without speaking. "You're fighting it," she said. "I know. Stop trying to force the center. You're not stronger than the clay. That seems like it should be false," I said. She smiled, brief and genuine. "Put your hands over mine," she said. "Don't guide, just feel." She positioned her hands on the clay and began to work, and I placed my hands over hers and felt the pressure she was applying, not the brute force I had been attempting, but something more like a conversation, a steady negotiating pressure that the clay gradually, almost willingly, agreed to. I felt the moment the clay centered, a sudden smoothness, a humming equilibrium, and it was so distinct, so physical, that I made a small sound of surprise. "There," she said. "That's it." She withdrew her hands slowly, and my hands were left on the clay alone, and for approximately 4 seconds, I held the center before it wobbled and collapsed again. "That's fine," she said. "You felt it. That's enough for tonight." By week 3, I could center most of the time. By week 4, I could open the clay and pull up walls that sometimes held and sometimes didn't, and I had stopped being surprised by either outcome. The class had developed the particular easy intimacy of people who have watched each other fail repeatedly in a confined space. We knew each other's names and wheel habits and the specific sound each person made when something collapsed. Claire circulated through every class, patient and attentive, crouching beside wheels, adjusting hand positions, demonstrating techniques. She touched without ceremony. It was a physical craft, and the teaching required physical instruction, but she always announced herself first, always made the touch purposeful and clear. With me, I noticed, she sometimes stayed longer than the adjustment strictly required. I told myself this was because I was slower to develop the feel for it than some of the others. This was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that by week 4, I was arriving slightly early and leaving slightly late and finding reasons to ask questions I already knew the answers to, and Claire was answering them with a patience and attention that felt like more than pedagogy. And I was not doing anything about it because I was not entirely sure. I was reading it correctly, and I had a reliable history of not reading things correctly. Week 5, I collapsed a piece I'd been building for 40 minutes. It was the most ambitious thing I'd attempted. A vase form, taller than anything I'd managed before, walls thin enough to feel genuinely fragile. I had been focused on it with total absorption for the better part of an hour, And then my attention shifted for one moment and my hand position changed and the walls folded inward and the whole thing slumped into a lopsided ruin in approximately 2 seconds. I sat back and looked at it. The studio had the particular Tuesday evening quiet of people deep in their own work. Someone's wheel hummed. Someone scraped a tool against bisqueware. The clay smell was thick and good, and I sat in the middle of it, looking at the collapsed thing on my wheel and felt, disproportionately and without warning, like crying. Not about the vase, about the 11 years of nothing you could hold, about the question I had been asking myself since approximately my 30th birthday. Is this it? Is this what I'm making with my time? That the data analysis had never answered, and the pottery was only beginning to. Claire appeared beside my wheel. She looked at the collapsed vase, then at me. She didn't say you can make another one, or that happens to everyone, or any of the true and useless things that are said to people who are not actually upset about the thing they appear to be upset about. She pulled a stool over and sat down beside the wheel, close enough to be present, and said nothing at all for a moment. It's not the vase, I said. I know, she said. I want to make something real, something that exists in the world and holds its shape. I looked at the collapsed clay. I've been making things that disappear for so long. Reports and analyses and nothing you can touch. I know that feeling, she said. I looked at her. You make things. Now, she said. I spent 6 years in architecture before this. 6 years of designing buildings that mostly got modified, beyond recognition or never built at all. She looked at the clay on my wheel. I came to ceramics for the same reason you did. Small things, things you could finish in one session. Things that were either what they were or they weren't, with no committee to answer to. I thought about that, the architecture of it, the decision to leave a field of large, unrealized things for a field of small, completed ones. Do you miss it? I said. Sometimes, not often. She looked at me directly. You don't have to choose the same way I did, but you do have to decide what you're actually making. Not just in here. I stayed after class that night. The others filtered out with the usual end-of-session energy, washing hands, covering work in progress, exchanging the easy chat of people who have spent 2 hours in pleasant parallel concentration. Claire was at the sink cleaning tools, methodical and unhurried, and I was reclaiming my collapsed vase from my wheel and had no practical reason to still be there. I want to try the vase again, I said. She turned. Now? If you have somewhere to be. I don't, she said. She dried her hands on the towel at her waist and came back to the wheel area. Wedge some fresh clay. I'll watch. I wedged the clay, working the air out. The rhythmic compression and folding that I had come to find genuinely satisfying, the most meditative part of the process. Claire sat on the stool. She'd pulled over earlier and watched with her arms loosely crossed and the attentive expression that was just hers. The one that made you feel like being watched was a form of care. I centered the clay. It went quickly, more quickly than it had in the first weeks, the muscle memory accumulating, the hands learning something the mind couldn't have taught them. Good, she said quietly, not effusively, just an acknowledgement that a thing had been done correctly. I opened the clay and began to pull up the walls. She came to crouch beside the wheel when I was halfway up, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence at my shoulder. Slower on the outside hand, she said. You're rushing the top. I slowed the outside hand. There. Her hand came over mine briefly, 2 fingers adjusting my pressure, demonstrating the pace, and then withdrew. Feel the difference? Yes, I said. The wall was rising more evenly, the clay thinning consistently rather than in the irregular way that led to collapse. I kept pulling. The studio was quiet around us, most of the lights off in the back, just the work area still lit, warm and contained. The wheel hummed. The clay moved under my hands with the particular responsiveness it had when things were going right, cooperative, almost eager. The vase came up taller than anything I'd made before. I stopped when it felt finished. Not when I decided it was finished, but when it told me, which was a distinction Claire had described in the first week that I had not understood until now. I lifted my hand slowly and the vase stood, imperfect and entirely itself, holding its shape in the quiet studio. I looked at it for a long moment. That one has something in it, Claire said. She wasn't looking at the vase. I turned to find her watching my face with the expression she usually reserved for the work, the full, unhurried attention that treated the thing being observed as worth observing completely. The overhead light was warm, and the studio smelled like clay, and the evening had gone fully dark outside the high windows. What does it have in it? I said. You stopped trying to make it be something, she said. You let it be what it was going to be. She paused. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. I looked at the vase. Imperfect walls, a slight asymmetry at the lip, the particular marks of my hands visible in the surface where I hadn't smoothed them away. You did, she said. She was still close, still on the stool beside my wheel, and the space between us had the quality of a question that had been forming for several weeks and was now simply waiting. I turned to look at her directly. I'm going to say something, I said. And if I've misread this entirely, you can tell me, and I'll be embarrassed for approximately 1 week, and then I'll be fine. The corner of her mouth moved. I've been coming early and staying late for 3 weeks, I said. And it hasn't been about the pottery. She looked at me for a moment with the same quality of attention she brought to everything, fully, without hurry, without glancing away. The clay was drying slowly in the warm air. Outside, the city was doing whatever cities do on Tuesday evenings, entirely indifferent to two women in a pottery studio deciding something. I reached out and touched her hand, clay-dusted, certain, resting on her knee, and she turned it over and held mine. And we sat for a moment in the warm light of the studio, with the vase still wet on the wheel between us, holding its shape, something I had made, something real, something that existed in the world now and wasn't going anywhere.